We continue our video series, Let's Talk About Marriage. This is Chapter 3, Bricks That Build a Marriage, based on Chuck Swindoll's book, Strike the Original Match. In our lesson today, the Apostle Peter will be giving us bricks we need to build strong marriages, as well as the mortar necessary to hold them together. But before we find out what these bricks are, let's look at the plans we're to follow in using them. Plans revealed in Ephesians 5. Please read on your own Ephesians 5, verses 21 through 33. Now, before we discuss Chuck's thoughts on this passage, I want to make some personal comments. This passage, Ephesians 5, verses 21 through 33, is a beautiful description of God's plan for marriage. I am aware that the phrase, "Wives, submit to your own husbands," is offensive to many. I am also aware that this phrase has been misused and abused and caused a lot of hurt by many in the church. When this phrase is used by itself, it distorts the meaning of this passage. Let's look at this passage in its context. Paul is saying in Ephesians that when we place our faith and confidence in Jesus, we become a new person. In chapters 4, verse 1, Paul urges us to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. And in chapters 5, verse 1, Paul calls us to live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. And then in chapter 5, verse 21, Paul states, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." Then Paul gives an example of submitting to one another by describing the marriage relationship. He compares the marriage relationship to Jesus' relationship to the church. Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This is the gospel. Paul shows that marriage is a model of the gospel. Jesus submitted to the will of God, not his own. So Paul is teaching us to mutually submit to one another. Wives, submit to a loving, caring husband. And husbands, love your wives with a self-giving love, willing to die for her. What wife would not willingly submit to that kind of loving care husband? It is mutual submission. I urge you to read this passage for yourself. Read different translations. Study the passage, and I believe you will discover its beauty. As Paul states, it's a profound mystery. Now that I have given you my personal thoughts on this passage, we will continue with Chuck's comments written in Strike the Original Match. Implied in these verses concerning the husband's and wife's roles are two searching questions. Wives, do I love my husband enough to live for him? And for the man, as he fulfills his role of adoration, he is faced with the question, do I love my wife enough to die for her? Today, neither question is a popular one. The concept of submission and adoration are highly criticized and rejected as being too confining, enslaving, and demanding. But inevitably, those who feel that way have failed to understand the biblical picture of submission and adoration. Nowhere does God's pattern for marriage encourage either spouse to demand or take advantage of the other. Quite the opposite. When lived out rightly, a wonderful fulfillment and freedom is possible for the husband and wife that is rarely experienced anywhere else. Now that we have seen the general pattern for building or rebuilding our marriage, we must choose the right bricks for the project. And here to help us with our selection is the Apostle Peter. Choosing the bricks that are essential. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, the Apostle Peter hands wives 4 bricks essential to building a strong marriage. For wives, the first brick is titled Actions. Peter uses the illustration of a wife who is married to an unbeliever. The wife's actions will win over her husband without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they see the purity and reverence of their lives. Instead of hitting these kinds of husbands with a brick, wives are to win them back to the Lord by demonstrating the solid brick of pure, virtuous, and respectful behavior. Nagging, shaming, preaching, these only alienate the man and worsen the situation. But the powerful witness of a wife's submissive behavior, Peter says, will attract the husband's attention and draw him back. Even though a husband may be stubborn and rebellious toward the Lord, he still studies and watches his wife intently when she lets her faith speak through her godly behavior. The second brick is labeled adornment. Quote, verse 3, "And let not your adornment be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses." Notice the word merely external. Peter isn't attacking or criticizing externals such as hairstyles and clothing. He's not saying ignore the way you look. Rather, he is telling wives not to go overboard in their preoccupation with external appearance. The adornment of an inner godly character should be a wife's primary focus. The third brick for wives is called attitude. Quote, "Let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God." Close quote. The most attractive quality about a wife is not her outer beauty, but her inward attitude, which allows her spirit to manifest itself in two specific ways: gentleness and a quiet spirit. Gentle carries the idea of genuine humility and quiet spirit, condones tranquility. Peter is not saying that wives should be silent doormats. Rather, he's describing a woman of strong character and self-control, someone who displays quiet eloquence and dignity. Such beauty captures not only the heart of men, but also the heart of God. The fourth and final brick that Peter mentions is designated attention. Quote, "For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you have become her children, if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear." Close quote. The Greek verb for obeying means to listen or attend to another. It's the idea of paying close attention to someone. Sarah's response to Abraham was positive and helpful. She took the time to understand and be sensitive to his needs. Wives, pay attention to your husband. Take the time to listen and respond to his needs. Few things will deepen a relationship like this one brick. It will enable you not only to know your husband in an intimate way, but also to respond with wisdom and a great deal of understanding. Now it's time for the husbands. We'll go to verse 7. The first brick seems to be rather obvious. Quote, "Live with your wife." End of quote. Staying in the same house, eating the same meals, and sharing the same bed, however, are not all that Peter has in mind here. The Greek term for live means to dwell together, and it suggests being closely aligned or intimately familiar with one another. In addition, the preposition with reinforces the idea of togetherness and close companionship. Therefore, it is the husband's task to promote and maintain harmony and intimacy in the marriage relationship. The second brick for husbands is, quote, know your wife, end quote. How? In an understanding way. In Greek, that phrase reads, quote, dwell together according to knowledge, end quote. Husbands, listen to what she's saying. Be sensitive to her cares and concerns. Consider the pressure she lives under. Take the time and initiative to discover her fears, desires, plans, and feelings. That's the kind of openness and involvement that it takes to know your wife. And it is also one of the major ways husbands demonstrate their love to their wives. The third and final brick Peter offers husbands is, quote, honor your wives, close quote. In Greek, the term for grant means to assign. You are assigned to nurture and uphold your wife's honor. And that includes far more than just treating her with the best of manners, although that is a good start. For a clue as to how deeply we are to honor our wives, note that the same word for honor used here is translated precious when it describes the blood of Christ in 1 Peter 1, verse 19. Both terms share the same Greek root. The idea is that a husband is to consider his wife a priceless gift, a precious treasure, worthy of the highest esteem. Husbands, have you assigned that kind of honor to your wives? Do they see it not only in your words, but in your actions? Does she sense that you treasure her? Or are you giving more affection and honor to a hobby, sport, or job? Now we go to mixing the mortar that secures each brick. The bricks Peter has given us are essential for building strong, lasting, and secure marriages. But one more thing is needed: mortar. Bricks alone cannot build a house. We need the godly traits Peter mentioned in verses 8 and 9 to cement the bricks in place as we build. Take a brief look at specific ingredients that cement the husband and wife together. Harmonious, which means of one mind and unity together. Next, sympathetic, which means moved with concern for the other. Next, brotherly, means affectionate, warm, and loving. Next, kind-hearted, means compassionate. Next, humble in spirit, means a humble mindset, unselfishness. And then next, not retaliatory or argumentative. And this means not having a reactionary spirit. When not properly mixed, mortar can easily crumble and fail to hold the bricks together. Are any of these ingredients lacking in the mortar that you're using to hold your marriage together? Husbands, are the 4 bricks that we studied for the wife, at which one does your wife excel? Give examples. Of the 3 traits listed for the husbands, which do you feel is your weakest? Why? Of the 3 bricks Peter used to describe the husband, which one does your husband do best? Can you think of some specific examples? As you study the 4 traits, action, adornment, attitude, and attention, which do you feel is your weakest area? Why? Once the preceding questions have been asked, Set aside some time when the two of you can discuss them using this following procedure. Now, this is important: affirmation, admission, and alteration. Okay, first, let the wife affirm the traits from 1 Peter 3, verse 7, that she feels her husband is strongest in. Following that, have the husband share what he thinks is his weakest area and why. Then spend some time brainstorming specific changes that could be made and write them down in your journal. Next, reverse the pattern. Let the husband affirm a specific trait from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 concerning his wife. Then have the wife share what she feels is her greatest weakness and why. Last, discuss some ways this area could be made stronger and write them down in your journal. So I hope that this will help you in building or rebuilding your marriage. And this will conclude our lesson today. And our next lesson is we're going to take a look at some cheap substitutes for these bricks. Have a great day. God bless.